So it's very exciting for me. And yeah, Hombakazi was a natural person to be one of our guests. We met her firstly in Bulungula, and Bulungula is one of the villages where I have had a very, very beautiful blessings happen in my life, including being invited to do research on the Umlungu clan, many of whom live near or in Bulungula and the Xhosa area. That was back in 2005, 2006. And then doing many village immersions in Bulungula village, where we bring people wanting to learn Xhosa into villages to experience a traditional way of life as much as is possible these days, where people still live without electricity or without water, and people get involved, obviously to learn Xhosa, but also just to be part of that lifestyle. Certainly it's one of the really great parts of my life. My education was spending time in a rural village, and teaching me appreciation for a lot of things that I was educated to think of as poverty, and realizing the beauty and the blessings in that lifestyle, and also obviously appreciating the hardships of that lifestyle, and again the blessings that exist in the world that I have been raised in, with electricity and resources, etc. So ultimately for me, there's been a huge experience of appreciation for life in all its forms, and for people and for diversity, and that's definitely part of what we're trying to share here at Ubuntu Bridge. You see there's a yin-yang. It's the harmony and the synthesis that comes from collaboration, connection, and respect. So there we go, a little bit of intentions more. So Sis Hombakazi, thank you for allowing me to go on this long ramble and giving context. You yourself have led a very, very interesting life, and one of many polarities and experiences. So I thought we could start. Your Facebook page, it introduces you as a Xhosa Heritage Ambassador. So I'm excited for that part of the talk this evening. An author, an agriculturalist, a traveler, and of course your travels and your academic studies have taken you all over the place, from obviously Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape to France, to Ireland. And I just thought it would be great to hear from you, to just introduce yourself and share whatever it is you'd like to start with about yourself and your life and what brings you here. And let me say, before you do that, half an hour or 40 minutes ago when we met, you were in your hut about 2 minutes away from your ronta, from where you are now, and it was such a beautiful background. And of course you've got a router in the ronta, but it wasn't good enough for Zoom, so you moved over to the Bulungula incubator, which is the office, and now sitting in this in the Bulungula incubator, which is a great space of education and transformation. And let's start there. Let's hear whatever it is you would like to start with in terms of introducing yourself. Thank you again for being here. Enkosi ngokuza namhlanje sisi.
Yeah. Molweni bethunana. Let me just start by greeting everyone. I'm Hombakazi Mercy, and I use both my names because, I love them. So I'm an agriculturalist by profession, as Craig has said. I studied at Fort Hare, did soil science, crop and soil sciences, and then I got a scholarship to go study abroad in France, Ireland, and in Austria a little bit. And then I did my thesis for double masters in Uganda. Entebbe. And I came back to South Africa in 2018 December, and I was writing a book while I was sitting in class sometimes, and I'm bored because that's how I'm wired. So I also write books, and now I'm currently working at Bulungula, working with schools here with an organization from Cape Town, Viva Con Agua, and we are installing water and sanitation in schools, rural schools. So that's who I am in 1 minute.
Awesome, thank you very much. So really, really interesting work that you're doing, and there's so many things we could talk about, but we've got this theoretically 1 hour that we have created. Maybe we will run a bit late. And I'm not a professional interviewer, so I'm going to do my best to hopefully touch on the different things that people are interested in. So yeah, we've got a bit of a list of questions that we thought would be interesting, and just jumping around a bit, and then we will try to get to some of the questions some of you guys wrote in the RSVP form. So we'll hopefully get to those as well towards the end, and then maybe there'll be other questions you guys have, which you can either pop into the chat box, or yeah, we'll just ask you live. You can unmute and check in. So until then, yeah, guys, just stay muted and we'll get through it. We are recording it, just so you all know, and yeah, hopefully it all works out. Okay, great. So the first book, Sis Mercy, Sis Hombakazi, this one called The Dissonant Rainbow,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I got from you when I was in Bulungula back in December, and I've read about half of it, and I really, really enjoyed it. I often found myself thinking, oh,
Well
this
done.
is the same way I think about things. How interesting. And then obviously in some ways very different. But yeah, what would you like to say about the book, to generalize? Because yeah, we're going to probably focus
Okay.
more on Xhosa culture and things, but it's still, I think it's a great point
Yeah.
to start from.
Yeah. So when I left South Africa in 2016 to leave, I started living in Ireland. My expectation was that, okay, so I'm going to a white country. Probably, you know how in South Africa we have our very differentiated livelihoods, and we have a gap that we keep. Like, I'm fine here, you're fine there. Okay, we got this, you know. And that's with our history, of course, of oppression and discrimination according to skin color. So my expectation was that, okay, probably these people would be discriminative. I mean, when I was starting to travel around South Africa, and I would experience in flights, for example, you're just sitting next to an oldish white woman who, when you start coming to sit, she really scoops her bags and you're like, what the hell? Like, what am I going to do to your bag? I'm just coming to sit, you know, in the airport and waiting. So you have those moments of kind of like cringing because of your skin color. But when I got to Ireland, it was a completely different case. People were interested to my life or to me as a person rather than my color. And it started to be very interesting for me. And so I started doing these reflections, just writing on my social media posts. And I realized that I was writing a lot, you know, I was learning a lot about South Africa. And the first question I was always asked when I met new people in the island was like, is South Africa still racist? You know? And that question really triggered many things inside me. You know, I was like, why would my country be known like that, you know? And then I started just reading and watching documentaries and going back to history, and I realized that, wow, there was just a lot that I needed to know about. And then I just started compiling this book. And then when I came, so the book talks about my stay abroad. Of course, it starts with the history of South Africa, where are we coming from as a country? And in terms of discrimination, I got into color, of course. And it talks about my stay abroad, how I felt, how it was. And then it gets back home on how we can do better as a country in integrating racial integration. That's what I stand for. I'm really about that. And it's a racial integration, not on anyone's term, not anyone being entertained by my culture, but someone coming in to learn about my culture because they want to know or they're interested to know. It's us exchanging and teaching each other on an eye level, you know. So that's what I talk about in the book. So it's my very first book, and yeah. Thank you, Craig.
No, awesome. And yeah, it really is a very diverse, it covers a lot of topics. So it's something that, yeah, it's worth reading if anyone gets the chance. And it also starts a lot of conversations, which we just won't be able to touch on. But one of the things I think, let's try jump straight in. You know, we're in this situation right now where, you know, whatever nefarious agents might be plotting or whatever is going on, who knows? There's many conspiracy theories and there's many possible, you know, real ones as well. But at the end of the day, this is not a situation that surprises me particularly. It feels like South Africa's always been, with the states of inequality, etc. It's always been on that potential for, you know, a kind of a breakdown in the so-called rule of law, etc. And one of the things that I saw right at the end of your book was this saying, which I wonder how to share it with people, but It's Inxeba liphila ngokuthunukwa. And it translates as, and of course we're trying to learn language here, so this will be shared. Let me put it into the chat box for you guys, everyone. So Inxeba is the wound, just like the movie Inxeba.
Yeah.
And Inxeba liphila. So Inxeba is liphila. It is alive. It's healed. Ngokuthunukwa.
Heals, yeah.
And earlier I asked Sis Hombakazi, like, how do we translate this ukuthunukwa? And we kind of came up with the word of aggravated. And maybe I'll let you talk to it a little bit more, Sis Hombakazi. Like, what is it about the saying that a wound heals through being aggravated? And how do you think it relates to what's currently happening in South Africa?
So in the book, I talk about South Africa being a wounded country. We are very wounded. I mean, from our history and from where we come from, inequality, the gap between white and non-whites, and we know everything. But we have been, during TRC, for example, the wound was just wrapped. It was not opened and treated and healed, but it was wrapped in bandages. Now it is bandages that are coming off, and they're coming off, and there is a rotting wound underneath. So what we see, for me, I just say it's a ticking time bomb. It's inevitable, because people are under stress. Hear me well. I'm not justifying what is happening, that people are looting and doing everything, but imiphumela, meaning imiphumela is the outcomes of not treating the wounds. So there is an underlying factor. These are just the symptoms that we see. So unless we are able to have these difficult conversations and talk as people trying to treat the wound, where is the wound, what is the wound, what has caused it, and how far is the damage, how rotten is it, what can we do, So that's how I feel. That's what I think we should be talking about, because tiptoeing surely has not helped us to say, oh no, I don't want to talk about this thing, I don't want to talk about politics, I don't want to talk about poverty, oh my God, I don't want to talk about gap. But until when? So that's what I'm talking into when I'm saying, and it really relates with the current situation. That okay, finally the bandages are falling off and the rotten wound is coming out on our faces, on social media, on everything, liking it or not, it's just on our faces. What do we do? How do we heal it?
What do you have any idea, or what would your best hope be for this current situation of looting? Like, what's the best case scenario for it to change into, in order for that wound to be really looked at, cleaned, dressed? Do you have any idea of how that might look? Would it be another TRC? Do you have any idea of how it could possibly look?
I think there's no one way of dealing with it, but one of them is like having a national talk, having a deliberate national conversations around these issues. And until we were able to talk about issues of racism, issues of inequality, issues of all these things, issues of oppression in the past, until we talk about them and we don't trip, and we don't get triggered and we don't get to stand in the streets and fight, then we haven't talked about them enough. It's going to be difficult when we're starting to talk about these things. We are going to want to give up. We are going to be triggered. We are going to want to fight. But I think we should be opening these conversations, because unfortunately, social media has started, and it's ugly. It's very dividing. It's ugly. That's the word. But imagine a scenario whereby nationally we are agreeing as citizens of South Africa to open these conversations with neighbors, with everyone, organizing with our communities, that okay, come, let's talk, black, white, blue, whoever you are, come, let's talk, and include media, because media is powerful. They are really aggravating the stories. They're putting up really terrible stories out there on our faces. But if we can be in control, because they are in control, they're they're putting out the press. But imagine if we, as the people, are calling them to come in our terms, and say, okay, sit here. We are doing this talk. We are talking about this. It's a difficult conversation. We are crying together. We are yelling, but we're building something. We're working towards something. I think there should be a deliberate national conversation. That's how I feel. It starts there.
Yeah, and Yakuva, I hear you. But also it's so interesting because, as you mentioned, I mean, social media is just not the place. It's a place of very divided attention, and this kind of topic needs very, very deep attention and very deep listening. And, I think to myself, how is this realistically possible? I mean, a national conversation, who's going to do it? Who's going to facilitate it? Who's going to represent who? Who's going to speak on behalf of who? It's such a tricky...
It's creating spaces, It's creating spaces on our own. We can start locally. It doesn't have to be national, but we can start just like we are now. We're gathered today as much as we're learning the language, but we are talking about current issues, issues that matter. This is it for me. This is where it starts. This is how it starts.
Sorry, I'm just giving a tick. That's great. Good point. I suppose I always end up thinking like on a psychological basis for people, like around healing, around trauma, around wounds, around triggers, around anger, around rage. And, being an Umlungu or being a YT from, leafy Cape Town suburbs and growing up with my own background, moving into Xhosa culture when I became a Twasa and the whole Sangoma training, which that's another story, but I got immersed in at the age of 23. One of the things that emerged partly through a process of reflection was the lack of initiation or of rites of passage, conscious rites of passage that are usually present in most cultures and move young men or young women into a place of adulthood or a place of whatever, or a place of healing in some regards. It's actually another topic which we won't, I think, go into much today, but it's just something that I wanted to appreciate is that I feel like, talking about Ingleba, the wound, even that video is another reflection on it. There seems to be a deep wound that I think runs kind of universally, through all people globally, maybe as part of this process of colonization, of rapid industrialization that has, I think, wounded us in a way that we're not yet sure how to heal. So for me, I think there's a lot to be said about this type of conversation and about exploring it. And I do also think that it is each of us, it's almost an individual journey whereby we begin to look at our own lives, our own relationships, the relationships in our communities on a national level, etc., and begin to explore and then do it together as well and share what we find and share our process. And just one more thing on that we seem to be so blessed in this day and age. I mean, some people would call it, I don't want to say cultural appropriation. I like to think of cultural appreciation. But in terms of being able to take so much knowledge and wisdom from so many different cultures, so many different healers, so many different things that can give us insights into what has actually gone wrong for humanity. Because I do think things have gone wrong. That's my personal opinion. And definitely part of the mission is to see how can we find healing and together, ideally, so that we can create, mutual and balanced prosperity. Okay, I don't want to preach too much on this. I thought to myself, let's lead it into this other saying, because when I asked guest speakers to come, one of the questions is, what's your favorite Xhosa proverb? Iqalo okanye isaqi, proverbs or idioms. And you chose unyawo alunampumlo, which translates directly as the foot has no nose.
The foot has no nose.
Yeah. And earlier...
So I love this one because...
No, I was going to say that earlier when I asked you, I actually wrote it the other way around. I said that the nose has no foot. But I've written it into the chat box for everyone. Unyao alunampumlo, the foot has no nose. And Hombakazi, how would you interpret that when you said it was your favorite proverb? Like, what does it mean for you?
So when we grew up, my mother normally used that statement or idiom to say that you can't treat people, or as a child, you can't swear at older people in your village. For example, that, there are people passing by and then you start swearing them, throwing stones at them. And she would say, you don't ever do that because you don't know where you're going to be the next day. You don't know where life will put you. And I saw that with traveling. I met different people, and I was at countries I never imagined I'd be in, cities I'd never be with, people I never imagined I'd be with, And it still applies to my life to this day that I still meet people, in Bolongola. And they're so connected. It's such a small circle. I meet Craig, and Craig knows someone that I know that I went. So it's like an on and on kind of a web. And then imagine if I'm rude with Craig, and then they talk to that person that, hey, I met your friend. Oh my God, she's rude. So literally it means meaning food cannot smell where it's going to be the next day. So you can't be saying, oh, I'll never go there. I'm safe. You can't stop. You can't start being having a terrible attitude toward people and be like, oh, no, I'll never go there. You never know. So it's like treating people right. And
cool. So that's so interesting, because the way I was thinking it was almost like a foot has no nose, so a foot can't smell, and a nose has no foot, so a nose can't get around. So the two, they need each other, they really need each other. And I think you were speaking also to that sense of like interdependence, and as you mentioned, other people, wherever you go, there's this connection, and we actually all play a role in the greater kind of existence of our society, and everyone has their place that's of equal value. So yeah, that's quite a cool proverb. Nice. Anything else you wanted to add there?
No, fine, thank you.
Okay, great. So I wonder, I think the place we were going to go to from here was talking about your third book, and now we get into kind of more of the Xhosa cultural stuff and more of the hopefully a bit of language as well, just at least vocab for people.
Okay.
The third one that you're going to release, we were going to talk briefly about a second one called To My Young Self. I think we'll come back to it if we have time, which is just a collection of quotes that you gathered during lockdown from like
COVID.
During COVID lockdown, like what would people want to say to their younger self? So it's kind of like an inspiration book for people and for youngsters. And I think that's what's so great about the work you're doing, is you're setting such an example for young people. Anything is achievable. We need to motivate ourselves and lift ourselves. And it's actually such a key message for the youth of our country, but actually for all of us. We always need that encouragement. So that second book is really, it sounds great. And yeah, I think for time I'm going to skip it, Sissy, just because we got interesting things to talk about as well. So the third book, your working title for it is Amagugu Akwa. And I think you said, or it could be Amagugu being heritage. And I always think of Igugule too, like obviously the informal settlement Igugule too, or it's quite formal now, meaning our pride, Igugu. That last time it was Heritage Day. I was like, oh, how do you say this? Heritage Day in Xhosa? And she said, oh no.
December, I moved to live with my mother in my village, some 25 kilometers from here in Bolongola. I was struggling to find a job, blah, blah, blah. Life was just a lot. So I just moved to live with my mom, And in that way, I reconnected to my roots, to my home where I grew up at, And yeah, I was just growing food with my mom because she grows food and we sell. So I realized that taking walks, I would go pass by the springs I used to fetch water from as a child, and going through the forest I used to pick firewood from. So it was just taking me back into my childhood. So I love taking photos. So I started taking photos and sharing on my social media, And I'll just take a picture, for example, of firewood, for example, inkun, and I would associate that with my childhood story. That, we used to go to the forest, pick firewood, and would play all day, eat wet berries, and then it's midday, and you're like, oh my God, we're here to pick firewood. You have to go back home, and your mom is wet. So I started relating to my childhood stories, and I was just kept posting every day. I made it my job in a way to kind of like keep people updated about the village life, And I didn't know I was writing a book. That's how all my books start anyway. So I was like, in the middle of it, I was like, wait a minute, I've posted around 20 posts of my childhood stories, long posts. Let me just collect that into a book and separate them by sections and everything. So that's how the book started. It started, I can say, early in 2020. So throughout last year, I was doing that, compiling that, so refining the photos, refining the stories, and it was written in English. And I was like, in the middle of it, it doesn't make sense to write my heritage in English. Why not write it in Xhosa and then have an English translation? So I just, when you're jumping into a frying pan, I literally felt that when I was translating the book. I was like, oh my God, did I just create there's so much work for myself, So I started translating because, again, I couldn't give it to anyone to translate it because it's my story. And I feel like when you're telling a story in Xhosa and in English, it's two different things, So I had to retell the stories in Xhosa this time. And I finished the first draft of my manuscript last Friday. So I'm like, I'm in that moment like someone bring me a wine or something, but unfortunately not. And so that's how the book started. And so I got the title from my mom, because I would say 80-90% of what I've written about the vocabulary and the words and learning about rituals and things like that, I had to ask her. So it's just my mother's book through me. That's what I can say about the book. So now it's with an editor, and I'm going to be getting it and starting the publishing process, which is not an easy one because I'm normally self-published. So so I'm bracing myself for the next stage.
Yeah, it sounds like an exciting development, so that's cool. Let's talk a little bit about some of the content, because that's also where I get really interested. Like, for instance, you told me a wood pile is called igoko. Plural would be amagoko. And I've seen so many wood piles in my life, and I never knew that that's what they were called. And I guess it made sense when you explained to me why, because you said that it's traditionally the space of a woman. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, so igoko, IGOQO, igoko, amagoko when it's plural. So igoko is what you see in the normally the coastal villages when you're driving down the Wild Coast. It's a huge collection of firewood, and it's done by women. It's women's pride. Other people, when they come here and they're like, they come to the family I rented, and in front of my hut is a huge igoko. It's like, it's long. It's maybe 3 meters by 2 or something. Like it's like it's more than a queen size bed. So
they're very impressive.
They asked me, and so the bigger the more respect for the woman, because they look at it and they're like, wow, like, so she can work. So people are like, normally people who come from the city is frustrated. Oh my God, is it a woman who's collecting all that? Oh my God, isn't she sick? That's hard labor? And I'm like, hey, it's pride, when she can go and get those 2 big bundles of firewood a day, she is building up something she's proud of. So women sit by igoko, on coldish, windish days when our winter is not harsh. You just need a bit of sun. So they pass by igoko and sitting with children, plaiting children's hair, drinking tea, eating imifino. Imifino is our traditional dish made with greens and mixing with ground maize. So it's a women's space. So what happens is that normally when a woman gives birth to a stillborn, back in the day, they would give birth at home, right? And so, say they give birth to a stillborn child, or they have a miscarriage towards when the child is matured, they'll be buried right next to under igoko, right? So it's a sacred space for women. That is why a young wife, she's not allowed to take down her igoko. So over maybe 2-3 years, women take down the igoko because the firewood underneath is like rotting and it needs to be used. So they start over and put fresh one. So when she's taking it all down and restarting over, she'll call an elderly woman of the family to be a witness in a way to her taking down her igogo, and the elderly woman will kind of check out if there's no new graves close, and nothing tucked under, because sometimes some people would do some traditional abortion and then they just hide the remainings of the baby under igogo. So the elderly woman, like, she doesn't say it, but she's just checking out any unusual thing, So that's how important it is. And you don't see men in our culture sitting by igogo. It's like, no. So men will be sitting by ubuhlanti, which is a crow. It's also made from poles that they gather, they get from the forest. And I don't know if you want me to move to Bushlanti, Craig.
I mean, you're welcome to chat about it. I'm writing all the Xhosa words into the chat box for anyone who is interested in what the words are.
But are you fine with it, Gorko? Can we proceed, or you have questions around it?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that's coming up for me was also we were talking about intonjane and uku. What was the word? Because that was new to me as well. Ukutomba. Yeah, so somebody, I think Rene asked the difference between ukutomba, tombisa, and intonjane. Maybe you want to just chat to that while we're on kind of
women.
Indaba zabafazi.
So ukutomba is an act of a girl's initiation. So in our culture, we don't have genital mutilation like other cultures. It's just taking a girl for initiation. It was done for teenagers. Girls were ready to be married off. So they will be taken and put up in a rondavel, and there's a curtain inside that rondavel. So you don't enter and you see indonjane, which is what they are called, initiatees, girls' initiatees. So it's ukutomba, right? And indonjane is the same thing. It's what it's called. It's how she is called when she's doing ukutomba, right? So you'll find that in the rondavel, I'm just going through quickly what's in the rondavel. When you get into the rondavel, there's reeds on the floor. It's called inqobo. It's not really reeds, but it's that thing that looks like reeds that grows in the marshes. It's not reeds per se that we use to make reed mats, amakuk.
How would you spell that word?
You have inqobo.
Zoe Pelanjane. That word. Yeah, the name of the reeds.
Inqobo, it's INK. XOPHO.
Inqobo. Nice. So it's the name of the reeds, literally. So
those reeds. There's different types of reeds. So we have inqobo, which is, it's kind of like fake reeds that you can't use to make anything with them. And we have imizi. Imizi meaning reeds, the actual reeds that you can make your reed mats, your ingobozi, that is the baskets. So you have ingobo on the floor, and you have a big curtain that hides the girls, so nobody sees them. For example, it's called uludwe, where indonjane stay. Uludwe, etweni, that is, everyone in the village will come, boys, girls, everyone, but they're sitting behind the curtain, and there's elderly women who come in and who are teaching them about transitioning into womanhood. So indonjane would normally be done when a girl started her period, her menstrual cycles. And then she's now taught about becoming a woman and being able to be married anytime and having children. So it's like that, it's that transition, being taught into that. So that's what indonjane is.
Thank you. Yeah, and the male equivalent's known as ulwaluko. And then an initiate, Mkweta, Abakweta. And I mean, it speaks to what we were saying earlier, just about, is there an effective way of helping initiate young men, young women into, being adults, finding their place in the world. And it's a difficult one because the world's changing so quick. So all of us from all different cultures, there's not an obvious way. Especially a world with social media, etc., etc. Most of us as adults or parents, we don't even really know how to cope with the world as it is. So it's a very tricky thing that I think humanity is facing at the moment. What do we need in terms of rites of passage? Yeah, very, very interesting. We've spoken about igogo, indonjane. There was, you talked about, this connection also to the wood pile igogo with the umbilical cord of children, or perhaps situations relating to childbirth, sometimes aborted childbirth, etc. But maybe also there's something to be said there about imbeleko. And you also shared another proverb with me earlier, which was akulahlwa.
Akulahlwa mbeleko ngakufelwa.
Exactly. Do you want to talk to that for a moment? I'll put that in the chat box.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll start with Inkaba. Inkaba is a umbilical cord, right? It's what dries off and falls off the baby's belly, what is that? Belly button?
Yeah.
So in our culture, Inkaba is when it dries off the mother or the grandmother, the child in our culture, they take it and they bury it behind the door of the rondavam, the main rondavam, the big, the main, we call it Indlu Enkulu, which is the main house. So it's buried there, and the mama will cover up again with mud, and it will look like nothing has happened. Or in other families, it's buried on the wall. So they dig and they put it in there, and then they plaster again. So in the Xhosa culture, that's why someone will say "Ip inkaba yakho," meaning where is your umbilical cord, when they're asking where your roots are, where your home is. So they'll say "Ip inkaba yakho," and you will say "Inkaba yam is a Xhosa emqhele," meaning in the village of Mqhele in Elidale. So that's where it's coming from. And then when Inkaba has dried off and fallen and buried, now they are part of the family and their roots are here. So there's what is called imbeleko. Imbeleko is something to carry a baby with. It comes from ukubeleka, which is to carry a baby at the back. Ukubeleka, emqolo, that is to carry. So in our culture, we back in the day, maybe 10 days after the baby is born, a goat or a sheep would be slaughtered just for making imbeleko. That is for making that hide that the mama will use to carry the baby. It is not a ritual. It is just what people used to do. They needed that. It's like going to buy a towel. It was their form of a towel to carry a baby at the back with, or a fabric, whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, it is that. And there is a saying, akulahlwa mbeleko ngakufelwa. So in the case whereby the family has done imbeleko, so the baby has that thing to carry with, and then the baby dies. So amaXhosa normally say, akulahlwa mbeleko ngakufelwa. That is, you don't throw away that mbeleko because the baby has died. You're going to use it to your next children. You keep it. So it literally, that's the phrase we use when we tell someone not to give up. Don't give up. Akulahlwa mbeleko ngakufelwa. So you keep pressing on, no matter how difficult or whatever you're facing is. So yeah.
It's so interesting that I have this like personal little theory around the way that in Xhosa culture, for instance, children are strapped onto their mums' backs, and they're carried around and they do all these different tasks. Their mothers just get on with it, whether it's tezaring inkuni or kokamanzi. Like, it's just the babies are put on the back, and I think they just get to rest there, and they can hear the heartbeats of their mother, and it seems to be such a calming place for a child to be. And I often look at sort of some of modern society, and I think of how few children are still carried on their mothers' backs in modern culture. They put in prams. Sometimes they put on the front of the chest, You see these little babies like looking at the world like, what the flip is going on? I often wonder what the impact is.
Your heartbeat, I guess.
Yeah, you can feel the heartbeats of the mother as well, and it's restful and it's protective. And I often wonder if that's one of the reasons so many children nowadays are often, they cry a lot. It's just something I've noticed. I don't know if there's anything to it, but I've always thought to myself, if I ever had a kid, I'm going to strap it to the back and get on with life, Anyways.
You need boobs to belega, to hold that thing, right? I normally tease man, there's Tom here. He carries his children at his back. But because he doesn't have boobs, so he keeps tying the thing, it keeps falling, So you could give that to a woman.
Yeah, I don't want to be discriminated against because I don't have boobs, ne? But no, I hear you. I hear you, and that speaks to one of my favorite my favorite proverbs, which I think is usana ulunga li lalio, huh? ulunga
Kalio.
ulunga kalio lufele ebeleni. Is that right? Like
No, usana olunga kalio lufela embelekweni.
so
Meaning
lufele
imbeleko, remember
embelekweni.
imbeleko?
So
Baby
there
doesn't
you
cry
go.
in there.
So if the baby doesn't, if the baby doesn't cry,
whatever.
there you go. So if the baby doesn't cry, it dies on the back. So in other words, if we have a problem, an issue, we need to speak up about it. Maybe maybe that links back to the current looting that's going on. I don't know. Maybe that's a big jump. But yeah, I think we are doing really coming close to the end of our planned time, and I think there's been so much already of great interest. And there's some really cool themes which I would love to tie up into a nice bow, but I'm also going to leave it for everyone who's listening in some regards. Maybe we should move. Hey. Augustini?
No, it's okay. Continue.
No, I'm just thinking maybe we should open it to a few of the questions that came through on the form, and maybe then open it up to other questions. I see one or two did come through. So in fact, it seemed like it was only from Bruce. I think it was the only question I saw. So let's just start with some of the ones that were written down. Avuile asked, is South Africa and the entire continent appreciating the culture and language as the world modernizes? And if no, what is it that we can do to make sure that we modernize while also recognizing our base culture and backgrounds? And we obviously chatted about this a little bit earlier. And it's a great question. How do you feel about that question? Do you think that people on the continent and elsewhere are appreciating cultures and languages during this modernization process? And what can we do to keep that balance?
Oh yes, I do feel like, for example, I lived in Uganda for like 6 months, and I had never seen how people are so proud of their culture. In every event, be it official or anything traditional, they rock their traditional attires. It's the most beautiful thing. So I do feel like people are still keeping to their cultures as much as there is modernization. I mean, you see how in West Africa they rock their fabrics in very, very modernized dress, beautiful designer dresses. You know, what is the fabric from Ghana? You see how it's trending and how it's like taking space. So yeah, in our clothes and in our food, you see how people still cook their fufu from Ghana and in Nigeria, and it's a killer thing on YouTube. You get there and there are people living in the United States and they are making their fufu. So for me, that is celebrating our culture through food, through clothes, through language. And I feel like we are integrating into our modern lives.
Do you think the learning of language and the speaking of language is one of the critical aspects to it?
Yeah, unfortunately, what I realize is that with the younger parents, it's maybe not even young, but I realize in our culture, you can get to your home and the children are just speaking some cartoon English, and you're like, can you speak Xhosa? To me, I'm Xhosa, you're Xhosa, why are you speaking English? But the person's like, oh no, like, boy doesn't know how to speak Xhosa, like he's blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what the hell? What are you talking about? This is your child. They should know the mother tongue, Immediately, as soon as you switch your tongue to talk to your child, then you should know that it's not right, And it's very common in our culture. They take their kids to because now we can access these schools, and it's such a pride. But I feel like on a long run, it's going to have such a terrible impact on the degradation of our indigenous languages.
Yeah, it's something that, it's something I've heard a lot of, where people in France, people in Germany, they obviously speak their mother tongue and they speak English. Whereas a lot of the time in African countries, people learn English and they let go of their home languages. And I think it's quite a big topic, and it's often related to some of the kind of colonial deliberately
Colonial,
setting up that
yeah,
sense of inferiority, or thinking that an African language is backward or African
yeah,
cultures are backwards.
yeah.
And
It's like
yeah,
it's the feeling of feeling smart and modernized when you're speaking English, and then it's like undermining your own language, which shouldn't be so.
yeah, I mean, I guess there's a place for using English, but not at the cost of one's mother tongue. Besides all the benefits of speaking multiple
Exactly.
languages, I think it's definitely one of the intentions, with Ubuntu Bridge. I mean, sometimes I've been kind of accused of like making money out of indigenous languages, which is I always find kind of amusing. But meanwhile, certainly one of the strongest intentions I have is preserving that connection to culture, and hopefully reinforcing the value of the language through the use of it by other cultures and by other people. So I'm a big believer that language holds and transmits a consciousness. Not always. You can get horrible people who speak a language and lovely people who speak the same language. So it's not that simple. But certainly, it's one of my great sadnesses is the loss and the extinction of many, many, many indigenous languages happening. For practical reasons at times, but nevertheless, I sometimes wonder what we're losing with those different cultures and different peoples. And anyways, we still got beautiful languages, and Xhosa I don't think is being lost too much. But obviously, we know it's transforming in the way people use it in cities as well. But hopefully in the lalis. How do you find it out there when you're in the village? Do you find that do the elders speak very different from the youngsters, or are the youngsters still, including yourself, are you still using Xhosa enough to maintain some of that older way of using the language, or do you find that it is actually degrading into a kind of mix of Islungu, Xhosa, and other vernac?
It's of course, elderly people speak a different type of Xhosa. I think in any other language, there's total of some kind of any language. But here, I feel like people still engage in Xhosa, proper Xhosa. Again, that depends on the literacy levels of an area. Again, it's an exposure thing, and I love it. Yeah, people speak Xhosa, undiluted Xhosa. It's beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, it's such a tricky one because obviously people need to practice English in order to progress their potential, ability to get employment or whatever in the cities. So it must be such a challenge for people, and I really feel deeply for that particular tension. It's a tough one. All the parents who've had to choose, do I teach my child, encourage them to speak English so that they can get jobs, or do I encourage them to hold on to culture, but maybe it might cost them economically? And I think it's been one of the great challenges. And maybe we can talk to it in another talk, or certainly down the line, that whole tension that's happened over the last couple of 100 years, where people are confronted with do we modernize for kind of survival's sake and adopt culture, adopt religion, adopt language, or do we hold on to our pride and our heritage? And sometimes it comes at a disadvantage. And I know that Xhosa Mda's book, The Heart of Redness, speaks to those kind of dynamics of just incredible tension and splitting families, and so much, really difficult wounds that have, speak to the kind of things of why I have a lot of empathy for the current situation. I don't like Umsholozi's choices in a lot of ways, but the stress that people have had to go through this colonial process really gives me a great sense of empathy for just trying to survive in this world, what decisions to make for your children, so it's a really, really difficult situation. And I guess I just want to once again hopefully encourage us to at least hold that sense of compassion, where obviously it's so easy to just dismiss people in certain ways, and of course there's room for both. Anyways, and also a lot of these topics are quite, they're based on opinion. So for instance, Bruce is asking, do we think there's a will to have the wound opening dialogue across all races? And he wonders if people are not afraid that opening a discussion will release such powerful explosion that the genie can no longer be put back in the bottle. I've got my opinion on that. I'm sure you've got an opinion. I'm sure everyone has an opinion. What do you think, Sis Hombakazi?
Yeah. From my side, there's no things should not be in a bottle in the first place, right? And I think we are ready to start those conversations. I've met people. I mean, I'm in Lungula, and there's a lodge here, so that means I meet a lot of different South Africans in different walks. So it comes natural for me to raise racial integration questions, and I do feel like people are matured and they hold a space and they allow other people to speak to truth. And I do feel like we are ready to hold those young people, older people. I've met hardcore elderly people that I'm like, I wasn't expecting that from you. Like, again, that's a personal experience, And there's young people who are like so hungry to integrate with other cultures. So for me, that's a positive green light, and it gives us an opportunity to say we can be able to talk about these topics, and we don't have to contain things. There's no formula for healing. That's what
I would agree with you. I think that it's just not sustainable to keep bottling it up. And I think there's enough people who do have the will, and sure, there'll be some people who don't care and just want to buy whatever type of phone or whatever it is that they want, or just survive financially. So it's not going to be everyone, but I think that there could well be a space, and maybe that's what will open up now. In other ways. Certainly I'm happy to have those conversations, and that's part of what I want Ubuntu Bridge to be, is just a place where we can speak about things that I don't often see being spoken about. And even if it doesn't happen on some kind of massive national project level, which would be great, at least we can start to have them in our little ways. And I guess that's how we start to change the world in small ways. But anyways, let's see. I see a question from Avuile. So we'll come to that in a secchi. And then I just wanted to see, I saw a typed one from Rihanna saying, SA went through a century more of colonial and apartheid oppression, and it's also got a democratically elected government. Why has more progress not been made to eliminate the legacy of colonialism? I think part of the conversation is also, how do we modernize or develop in a way that connections to tradition are not considered a handicap to overcome, but an asset? Connections to tradition can only enrich, in my opinion. It's not a zero-sum game. People can flourish in mixed cultures. So yeah, I think you probably answered it yourself, Ruela. It's about people's will to explore, and unfortunately, the new South Africa, it's fits into a global model, an economic model that has a particular agenda. That unfortunately, these kind of nice things of dealing with healing and cultural integrity and reconciliation are only good on a marketing level. There's not really a budget for it, and there's not really space for it when everyone is on a whole nother game. So it's a tricky one. I mean, I get it. Hombakazi, you got a thought on that as well?
Yeah. I mean, you've just said it all.
Okay, cool. Then let's give Avuile a chance to ask. I see they've gone back into the waiting room, so I've readmitted. Avuile, if you're there, do you want to ask? In the meanwhile, Rowella says, integrate, affiliate, identify, recognition of the value of people as individuals is key, respect for culture. And the difficult part is when you need to talk about events where the people are ashamed, e.g. British colonialism. I think that's such an important point, Rowella, and it's something that I've battled with, because as I've discovered things about history, about culture, about economy, about my privilege, about a lot of things, it's brought me sometimes a sense of great shame, being, from wherever I come from. And at the same time, especially being a Xhosa in the Xhosa culture, I discovered a deeper appreciation for my ancestors and appreciation for the love and the benefits that I've received. So it's been an interesting dichotomy. And I think it's a really, shame shuts people down. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of the talk around whiteness. I think a lot of white people are too ashamed to actually really be able to honestly look at the issues around whiteness and privilege. And it's sad, and I think it needs a lot of tact. So if I can continue to keep maturing, which sometimes I'm not always convinced about, I hope that that's something I can do, is help facilitate these conversations in a way that allow people to not feel shamed, but are able to access the shame they carry and to find ways to transform it And I think that is a really important part of the human journey at this time. Avuyile, you're saying you'll wait if there's discussion? Yeah, go for it. Do you want to just unmute and ask a question?
Okay, thanks, Makhosi.
Sure,
Can
Buti.
you hear me?
Yeah, siyakuva Buti.
Yes, Mhlaba.
I want to discuss particularly on the first discussion by our author when she was unpacking about her first book, Design and Rainbow. I think it's very critical, and she has said a mouthful on how that now is transpiring on what is happening. Of course, what is happening is criminality that has been. We are not condoning that. It's criminality, and it's something that we must not own as a country. We must distance ourselves from what is happening. But of course, as she have said, that it was a time-ticking bomb. You are all aware that we are the most unequal country in the world. It has been widely reported that South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world, where a CEO owns, gets paid an amount that can pay more than 400 people in the 10% of the less paid people in South Africa. So you can imagine how unequal our country is.
Yeah.
So I think what she's raising is very critical, and there is no other time than now to say, how do we then as South Africa craft a way forward economically? How do we make sure that everyone within the South Africa Inc. can own and share? You know, if those people were having something, if all of them were having jobs, we're not talking about high-earning jobs, just basic, if they're earning something, I doubt there was anyone who was going to be able to convince them to go and ban any proper infrastructure in South Africa. I mean, we need to be realistic. Let's make an example about a company, for instance. In a company, even if you own a 1% shareholder, you are responsible about anything that is happening in that company. Imagine if in a South African context now, if we make it a point that at least a significant percentage get to own what is happening in the economy, not in terms of ownership, in terms of being active in the economy, contributing to the economy, having a job. We won't be having those kind of, you know, this is a small trigger about someone who's arrested, who has done something wrong, but people were able to convince the masses of the poor people of South Africa to say, no, you can go and ban, and they just jumped because they are unemployed. There's nothing to lose anyway. So if they had anything to lose, if they had jobs, they were not going to ban their jobs. I don't think so. It never happened. So I think that's something that we need to discuss openly, all of us.
Yeah.
How do we craft a way forward economically such that we accommodate everyone in South Africa?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Buti.
That are found in the Design and Rainbow. If you address that, you'll find everyone happy and welcoming. You know. So I think Design and Rainbow is a very good book, and it enlightened us to say we are sitting in a serious problem in South Africa. We have been pretending each other. Not talking about the real issues, like the economic issues that are a problem, because many people are hungry. How do we make sure that everyone is participating in the economy, and so I think that's what is important for me for this discussion. Thanks, Makhosi. Who taught you Xhosa, Makhosi?
Abantu baninzi besiXhosa mfundini, nencwadi zininzi and ndiyazifundisela yabo, so indlela inde. But guys, yeah, so there's lots of stories we can share, and you know what, I think you hit the nail on the head, Bravuyile, and it's about discussions. And one of my personal feelings is that it's about sharing stories, and I think that's what Sis Hombakazi has done has done well, and she's stepped up to, and she's leading by example, sharing her stories, putting out opinions, being courageous in that way, and allowing us to respond and start discussions. So that's something that I would like to encourage everyone on, including myself. But most importantly, to listen to the stories of others, and perhaps that's a good place to start from. Just one or two other things. Bruce has put the link for the book. Yeah, the book is great, and we'll share those kind of links as well. Woon, I've put your questions. I'll share them also with Hombakazi, and we'll see if we can get those to you somehow. And why is a black language not mandatory in SA schools up to matric? Why does the ANC not enforce this? An easy step to healing South Africa. The ANC, I mean, look, guys, there's so many opinions on all of these things, so it's difficult. But the reality is that what the ANC inherited was not simple, so we can't always just assume. And right from the arms deal in the beginning, things were manipulated, and, a lot was handed over with the old South Africa that wasn't just a clean slate. So I think it's complex. There's 11 national languages, everyone's from different areas. People are focusing on just trying to improve economically. There's just so many dynamics at play. So yes, that would be great, but also a lot of white South Africans moan like hell when Xhosa was starting to replace Afrikaans as a mandatory language in the Western Cape. It caused headlines and outrage, and so for me, from a place of privilege, I like to think that a lot of the responsibility lies in the hands of people who inherited a very comfortable situation, and inherited a lot of access to resources, a lot of power. And, I'm still that white Xhosa guy, just because of this effort I've made to learn a little bit of Xhosa and help teach. And that's not because of how great I am. That's because of how lame everyone else is. No offense. Most of you guys, my students, are older, and there's not a lot of my peers learning language and reaching out and bridging these gaps, and it makes me very, very sad and sometimes extremely angry as well. And I don't exactly have a flock of youngsters who all making an effort in this department either. And it's not for the government to force that on people. It's for people to realize that, hey, I'm surrounded by people, I'm surrounded by languages. If I want to connect, if I want to contribute to reconciliation, then I need to get to know people. I need to hear their stories, and I'm not going to make them do it in my language, on their land. It's a big one. And, I try not to preach about it, but if I found a bit more courage, I probably would. So, for me, that's where it really starts. Adam says all kids learn Afrikaans. Exactly. So I don't think we should ever underestimate the degree to which colonial / apartheid / old South African kind of things and dynamics are still very, very firmly entrenched. And yes, government has a role to play, but they've got millions of roles to play. I mean, including navigating being a functioning economy in a culture that oppressed them. It's a very, very weird situation if you really think about it. It's a very, very difficult one with very many complexities. Yeah, thank you guys. Laura, it's a pleasure. There was one or two other more questions. I just wanted to maybe speak to them quickly. I see I've lost Hombakazi. I don't know if she's still there for now. But
yes, I'm here, but I realized that my connection was going.
Okay.
So I just switched to a non-video.
Okay, cool.
I'm still here.
Okay, great. I just saw Sally asked that she read in a book once that Xhosa people didn't smile with their teeth because showing teeth is a sign of aggression. Was this ever true? Sally, thank you. You gave us both a good laugh.
No, I don't know where that comes from. The way we laugh, there's no way we could be hiding our teeth. We laugh for living. We laugh all the time, so...
Yeah, no,
I don't know
nothing.
where it's from.
The only one I know was the eye contact thing. Sometimes eye contact is seen as being like a bit more direct.
Oh, yeah.
So people would generally lower their eyes or occasionally look up, but mainly look down when talking to elders or people to show respect. That's the one I know of. But the teeth one,
yeah,
never.
It's confrontational to look someone in the eye, especially an elderly person. So in our culture, we don't look people in the eyes. It's not rude. So some people feel like you're being rude, but it's like, I'm respecting you. So it's those dynamics.
And then there was another question. Robin asked, how do we suggest people go about learning Xhosa African culture without being tone deaf or offensive? And you had a nice answer to that earlier as well, Hombakazi. What were you saying?
Can you? Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, if you are learning, there's going to be offense because you're going to say things you didn't know aren't supposed to be said. So I normally say, just go for it, just integrate, just have respect at heart. You know, I do have white friends, and we step on each other's toes at some point, but because I know it's coming from a point of respect, not from any point of recklessness. So I forgive them, and we teach each other. So I think a point of respect is everything.
Yeah, great answer. I mean, I'm a white privileged male who has, I wouldn't say I've blundered through this whole thing, but there's so many points of ignorance that I didn't even know until many years later. And, no one has ever been offended by me. People have always been accommodating, patient, welcoming, encouraging. And, sometimes people have pointed out to me, hey, we actually don't do that, we do this. Or, I mean, I've sometimes actually said really kind of rude words instead of, like the word for egg and the word for the place where the egg comes out after you've eaten it are in some ways vaguely similar. And sometimes you can say, like, you can make mistakes when you're learning. Most people either find it funny or at the worst get a bit confused. But generally it's, as Hombakazi says, you might cause offense. And, that's part of the conversation. People can handle it. They respond, you respond. It's part of growth and learning. So I would say don't be too afraid, but it is good to be sensitive in all situations, obviously, and respectful in all situations. And I think that was all the written questions we got. A few people are saying thanks Charlene, Nkosi Sisi, Nkosi Laura, Nkosi Gregory and Bruce. And I think Ruella was saying something about the complexity. And yes, look, corruption is a global phenomena. And, the things that I've learned about, American foreign policy, British foreign policy, it definitely doesn't, ANC corruption is by no means a special thing. So for me, it's like, it is bad. We want it to end, but I don't think it deserves any kind of singling out. It's a complex situation with many, many facets. And I mean, anyways. Okay, and then Charlene, British, husband is Afrikaans, trying to learn Xhosa. Yeah, it is special, and it really does open up a whole new world. I think that's the point at the end of the day. We can't all save the world, and everyone has, we can't tread so carefully so as not to offend. People are strong, people are robust. As long as we're open to feedback, that's how communication and relationships develop. We don't have to be perfect and get it all right the whole time. I think we don't want to patronize people by like, ooh, I don't want to disrespect them by calling them the wrong thing. No, like maybe you get it wrong and they might give you feedback and you have to be self-aware enough, or we have to be self-aware enough and mature enough to be like, okay, I get it. That hurts. That makes sense. I apologize. I will try to do different. If it's called for. Sometimes it's not. Thanks, Woon. Bye-bye, Yini. And thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And Sis Hombakazi, siyabulela kakhulu, Sisi.
Thank you, guys.
Imazinetole. Would you like to say anything to close?
Yes, and I just want to thank everyone who has taken their time to listen to our conversation. I mean, this is a beautiful start of the conversations, difficult conversations that we need to make. So, yeah, thank you. And great to connect with all of you guys. I couldn't text each and every person, but I'm really honored and humbled. And yeah, for those who are Instagram who want to connect, we can connect. I think Craig is going to write that down. But yeah, I'm Nkosazana_H on my Instagram. And on Facebook, I'm Hombakazi Mercy Mandega. So yeah, we could keep the conversation going on social media and everywhere, just to stay in touch and connected. Thank you.
Sis Hombakazi siyabulela kakhulu. I'm putting both of those into the chat box, and I'll email this whole chat, the chat box chat to everyone who wants it. Otherwise, just WhatsApp Ubuntu Bridge direct. We have a new number now as well, which is +27 83 566 1182. So on WhatsApp, we've got a new WhatsApp number. It's just the same as our number. Otherwise, email us and we can send it to you if you don't get it, if you didn't RSVP. Other than that, Sis Hombakazi, hopefully we'll have another discussion at another time. And also looking forward to other guests and continuing this this idea of building community across oceans and across languages and across skin level divides. And thank you everyone for being here. Inkosi kakhulu, siyabulela, Tsamaku, and blessings.
Ubuntu Bridge, www.lenxhosaonline.com